Mr. Lavrov, spasiba. Thank you for joining Lateline. Tell us what brings you to Australia.
Diplomacy. Well, these days, we really have our relations on the rise. The President of Russia and Prime Minister of Australia met last November in Honolulu in the margins of the APEC summit, and they decided that the potential of two countries in trade, economy, investment, cooperation in international affairs is certainly not tapped enough. And there was an interest on both sides to move the relations further. And I can tell you that it's in the interest of both countries. We have some modest trade, about $1 billion a year, which is nothing compared to what it could be. The Russian investments to Australia are about $700 million, which is also not very impressive, but the Australian investment in Russia is 10 times less, 10 times smaller, which is very unusual. And I'm coming from New Zealand, and their companies are much more active in Russia. And today I met with the business community, Australian business community, and we discussed the opportunities, including the measures taken by the Russian government to simplify business procedures, to improve climate for private investments, creation of the Russian Direct Investment Fund to help foreign investors to come and settle. And I believe they were quite interested, and I'm sure there would be some effect, some results. We also discussed the need to revive the Russian-Australian Business Council and maybe making it a bit broader, also involving politicians, parliamentarians, in addition to business communities of the two countries. And this would be discussed between the two governments. Today with my colleague Kevin Rudd, we agreed that this is a good idea. I invited him to visit sometime in autumn. 10th of October, we have 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations. They were established in the fall of 1942, in the midst of the World War II, when Russia was fighting Hitler, and Australians, together with others, were operating so-called northern convoys, helping supply the Red Army. So I believe it's a symbolic importance which we shall really recognize, and we agreed that we will commemorate that date by certain events, and we will discuss how this could be arranged.
So specifically, where is the potential to grow this relationship?
Well, the potential is in the economies of the two countries. We agreed that in addition to agriculture and mining, which have been the traditional areas of cooperation, we will move forward in energy, including nuclear energy. Last year, the agreement on cooperation and peaceful uses of nuclear energy entered into force and is being implemented. The agencies of Russia and Australia in charge of this have exchanged memorandum laying down the procedures for cooperation.
For Australia to supply uranium to Russia?
Exactly, and the pilot dispatch will take place this year. We also have very promising area like outer space, telecommunications, information technologies. In all these areas, the companies are really getting in touch with each other. And I'm sure that in the context of the forthcoming APEC summit in Vladivostok in September this year, the contacts would become more and more intense and more productive. Russia is promoting the agenda which continues the traditional items like integration and liberalization of trade and investment regimes, which is in itself an important thing for business, but we also add emphasis to innovation areas of cooperation, food security and development of transport and logistics systems in Asian Pacific, using also the benefits of the Russian Siberian territory, plus Northern Sea route. With this climate change, it becomes more and more eligible for navigation. So opportunities are quite plentiful.
Will Russia support Australia's bid to join the United Nations Security Council?
Oh, you mean as non-permanent member?
Mm.
I think the elections are scheduled 2 years from now, probably. Well, Australia is a respected member of international community. Australia is a member of the Western European and others group in the UN, and this is through these groups that the candidatures are being submitted. Normally, in cases like this, when we have quite some time before the actual vote, we encourage the relevant groups to have consensus on the candidatures. But whether Australia is elected a non-permanent member of the Security Council or not, we have very stable and very productive cooperation in the United Nations, because the UN is not only Security Council, it's the General Assembly, it's Economic and Social Council, Human Rights Council, many other specialized bodies where Australia is represented, and the Australian diplomacy has been always professional, inventive, and in most cases balanced and unbiased.
Can you see any impediment to Australia joining the Security Council?
No, it will have to be decided by a vote if the Western group
but you, Russia would support it?
Russia, has to follow the gentleman agreement reached some time ago by the permanent members of the Security Council. That's the US, UK, France, China, and Russia. And the gentleman agreement goes that the permanent members of the Security Council do not disclose how they are going to vote for the election of non-permanent members of the Security Council. So you, I hope, would understand if I don't violate this gentleman agreement in front of the cameras. I'll tell you when we finish recording.
Now, you mentioned that you'll host APEC later in the year. What's top of the agenda?
As I said, APEC is about liberalization of trade and investment regimes, and this would certainly be part of the agenda. APEC is about promoting integration, and this would also be continued under the Russian chairmanship. And we add, in this context, in the context of integration and liberalization, we add 3 themes. One is food security, which is very much topical these days. Another is developing transport and logistics systems, also offering the Russian transit opportunities to other Asian Pacific members. And the third item which we would like to add is emphasis on innovation in economy and in research. And basically this was quite deliberately explained by the article which President Medvedev wrote a couple of days ago, and which we transferred to our Australian partners, and this was received with interest. So I hope that the summit would be productive. Australia is chairing G20 in 2014, and Russia is chairing G20 in 2013. So after APEC, we will continue to be part of the troika of G20. So many fora, so many formats. I think it's understandable because of the number of the problems accumulated in the world. APEC certainly has a relation to G20 activities. G20 is about not allowing the financial and economic crisis to bring us to another recession. APEC is about a region which is pulling the rest of the world economy out of the crisis. So it will be a logical continuation. APEC this year, chaired by Russia. Next year, G20. And year after next, Australia would be chairing G20, and I hope that we all will continue the agreements reached in G20 so far, and that there would be no relaxed attitude towards implementing the reform of the international monetary and financial system as agreed at the middle of the crisis. We shouldn't be complacent and should bring this to fruition.
If we can just move to Syria. The Arab League suspended its monitoring mission over the weekend. It's called for the UN Security Council to support a move that would see President Assad transfer power to his vice president, and then who would then oversee elections. Now, will Russia support that plan?
Russia would not support anything which would be actually imposed on Syrians. The Arab League initiated a peace plan in November, which was very straightforward and consisted of 3 points. First, end of any violence, irrespective of where it comes from, meaning that the opposition must also distance itself from the armed extremist groups. The second point, the beginning of the dialogue without any preconditions. And the third point, no outside interference. These 3 elements of the Arab League initiative of last November became the basis for a draft resolution which Russia introduced in the Security Council and which is on the table of the Security Council. We strongly supported the Arab League initiative which was introduced in December to send an Arab League observer missions to Syria to watch both the government and the opposition and to establish facts about what is going on the ground.
And they've been doing that. And they now say the
yes,
fighting is intractable.
They have been doing this, and they produced a report 1 month after they were sent there. And then the Arab League convened a week ago to consider this report and adopted a decision which, contradicts the findings of the report. And then this decision was taken to the Security Council, where it is now, and we are discussing it in New York, but we do want to have the report itself on the table. It took us some time and some days to get this done, but now the report is in the Security Council, and we would be guided by the facts. We would also be guided by the need to avoid taking sides in a situation of internal conflict. The international community, unfortunately, did take sides in Libya, and we would never allow the Security Council to authorize anything similar to what happened in Libya. Yes, we condemn strongly the use of force by government forces against civilians, but we condemn in the same strong way the activities of the armed extremist groups who attack government positions, who attack administration in various provinces of Syria, who attack police station, and who terrorize people, telling them not to come to jobs, not to come to hospitals, not to come to shops. It's impossible to, when you say that government forces must leave towns, but at the same time you watch BBC, you watch CNN, and you see that parts of those towns are taken by the armed opposition. Are you realistically expecting that any government in this situation would leave the city and leave it to the armed groups? I don't think so. So my point is that international community must speak one voice. If we want to end violence, irrespective of where it comes from, and that's the language of the Arab League, then all those countries on whose soil various opposition groups are present, they must lean on those groups. We all must lean on the Syrian government and tell them that you must sit down and stop this. You must agree how your country is going to be run. We would not prejudge the outcome, whether this would involve the president of Syria leaving, or whether there would be some other solution. We were through this in Libya when the African Union, the organization of 50-some countries to which Libya belongs, introduced a plan under which the fate of Gaddafi would have been decided at the end of the negotiating process as part of the overall package. It was rejected because some countries outside the African Union said, no, 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 Gaddafi must go before anything else happens. And then we had what we did. The African Union was humiliated because to throw away an initiative which was aimed at peacefully resolving a crisis, just because somebody had some very personal animosities, was a mistake. And if we're going to repeat this in Syria, well, we cannot help it if some people insist on doing something bad, but we would not be party to it, and we would not let the Security Council endorse something like that.
But can I just pick up, you said if someone's going to do something bad, isn't that person at the moment President Assad? He's turned his weapons and his army on his own people.
Yes,
but you talk about sovereignty and protecting a country's sovereignty.
Sure.
But sovereignty surely shouldn't be absolute.
No, it is not.
The international community has an obligation, does it not, to protect people when governments turn their own weapons on them?
It is not part of the law. It's part of the moral obligation, if you wish. And yes, I said a few minutes ago that we condemn strongly the use of force against civilians.
But it's been 10 months.
Just as we condemn strongly the armed groups attacking the government offices. The first attack against government in Syria was registered in April. And you know, you cannot say that when government kills people, it's bad. When somebody kills government official, it's good.
Well,
no?
in some respects.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
No, there is a problem, and it's a problem of balance. Because, of course, the government has a force much greater than unarmed civilians. Clearly.
No,
it's not a relationship of equals. The government obviously has more power if it's backed by the military.
I'm sorry, did you watch the TV images from Damascus, from other Syrian cities?
Sure, but there are independent observers too.
Yes, independent observers and the media. We insist for the media to be present freely in Syria. And the independent observers and the media show the pictures of peaceful demonstrators being accompanied by armed people with grenade launchers, with machine guns, and they are attacking government offices. And that's why we want the report of the Arab League observers, the report of the mission which was authorized by the Arab League, to be available, to be available to the Security Council and to the international community. I condemn violence anywhere. We have nothing against peaceful demonstrators.
The opposition says it wants to sit down and have dialogue, but it just does not want to have that dialogue with President Assad.
Yes.
If he is confident that he has support, why not go to free and fair democratic elections and put himself up as a candidate?
No. Look, you are already prejudging the outcome of the dialogue. The opposition says we don't want to negotiate with the current regime, and we don't want the president of Syria to participate in any elections. The slogan under which the opposition works is no dialogue. And this is something which is very different from, say, the situation in Yemen, when the eventual deal was negotiated with full support of outside players. Everyone, Europe, US, China, Russia, the Arabs, they were pulling respective forces in Yemen to sit down and to agree. And they did agree eventually. In Syria, the countries where the opposition is based, they're publicly saying, you should not accept any offer for a dialogue. And this is the difference.
But the Syrian National Council has met your envoy just in the last few days in Paris, is that right?
No, I met with the chairman of the Syrian National Council in Moscow a couple of weeks ago. And we would be ready to receive him and other groups of the opposition again. The main thing we want to achieve, and we discussed this with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, with other friends in the region, the main thing we want to achieve is to bring them to a negotiating table. And to say that they're not going to do this until President Assad leaves, I think is a mistake. Because he's not leaving.
But is
So
it worth
what
the
is the
bloodshed?
alternative? If
Is it worth the bloodshed just to keep
no.
one person?
You answer me
in a
now. I
position?
will be interviewing you. Sorry. They say we are not going to negotiate until he leaves, and he is not leaving. What are you going to do? Shell him? Bomb him?
I guess the UN wants to apply more pressure. Perhaps an arms embargo.
The arms embargo. You know that the arms embargo was introduced on Libya, you know? And after that, people were bragging that arms were supplied openly. The French Minister of Defense said that, yes, we were sending arms to rebels. You know, the hypocrisy is not something which the Security Council should be engaged in. My point is, if they say we want negotiated solution, they must negotiate with the representative of the current government. I don't think that President Assad personally is going to negotiate, but there would be somebody from this regime. If they say that we can accept Vice President as a head of interim government or whatever, why don't they sit down with him and negotiate? And then it would be a Syrian solution, not a solution imposed by outsiders.
Is Russia still selling arms
Yes.
to the Syrian regime?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. We signed some contracts, and contracts must be implemented like treaties. The contracts were signed years ago, and the deliveries were done last year.
So you're arming one side of the fight?
No, we are arming the constitutional government, which we don't approve of of what it is doing, using force against demonstrators. But the arms.
But you are picking sides.
The arms. No, we're not picking sides. We are implementing our commercial, contractual obligations. The arms we are selling to Syria, they are not used against demonstrators. Those are arms to protect Syria and to ensure Syrian defense.
How can you be so sure?
Because I know what kind of arms there is.
Britain's UN ambassador Mark Lyle Grant only last night said it was glaringly obvious that transferring weapons into a volatile and violent situation is irresponsible and will only fuel the bloodshed.
Yes, so what? That's his statement.
You don't agree? You don't think
No,
it fuels the
I know
bloodshed?
that Britain and the United States and others ship arms in the Middle East 10 or maybe 100 times more than Russia does.
You say they're hypocrites?
Well, I said hypocrisy is not something the Security Council should be engaged in. Look, you said 18 minutes, right?
Yes, I'm almost done. The Americans say Iran is supporting the Syrian government with arms and tactics and equipment. Do you share their concerns about that? Is it true?
I'm concerned about another thing. I'm concerned that what is going on in Syria and what is going on in the region, some people take in the context of isolating Iran. And if this happens, if this logic prevails, then unfortunately we will be witnessing a much bigger drama. What is going on is an attempt to change the balance in the Muslim world. And the rift between Sunnis and Shia is absolutely evident. And it is of direct relevance to what is going on in Syria, to what is going on around Iran, to what is going on in Iraq. Don't forget about the Kurds, Kurds in Syria, Kurds in Iraq, Kurds in Turkey. The people who are obsessed with removing regimes in the region, they should be really thinking about a broader picture. And I'm afraid that if this vigor to change regimes persists, we are going to witness a very bad situation, much broader than just Syria or Libya or Egypt or any other single country. And we don't want to make this easy. We want to prevent this type of development. And I hope that knowledgeable people, reasonable people, understand what it is about and would opt in favor of dialogue and engagement of everyone, not in favor of isolating somebody. Isolation doesn't work. People tried to isolate Hamas when Hamas won the democratic, free and fair elections back 5 years ago. So we have the problem now, because the government, democratically elected, was artificially announced a rogue government. Now people are trying to isolate Iran, people are trying to isolate Syria. They did try even before this event started. Just to be very clear, we are categorically against civilians to be subject to violence by whoever. But this must be an approach applied evenly to all those who use force in an internal conflict, and to all those who avoid negotiations, continue provocations in the expectation that somebody from outside would come and help them. It's not decent. The decent thing is for all those who have influence on various parts of opposition and the government to say in one voice, you must stop it, all of you. And without taking any part in the dispute, to persuade them, to lean on them, to make them sit down and negotiate. There is no other way.
My very last question. 10 months on, 5,400 civilians dead. At what point do you, as a friend and ally of President Assad, pick up the phone and say, it's time to go, in an effort to bring the parties together?
We are not a friend, we're not an ally of President Assad. We never said that President Assad remaining in power is the solution to the crisis. What we did say is that it is up to the Syrians themselves to decide how to run the country, how to introduce the reforms, what kind of reforms, without any outside interference. And that's why people who say that it is impossible to talk to the regime, I believe they are the reason why the crisis is procrastinating. I'm sorry to say this. But if there is no dialogue, then your question means only one thing. When you say how long this can continue, your question means only one thing, that you want a second Libya. And this would be a disaster for the Arab world and for the world politics.
No, well, Muammar Gaddafi wouldn't stand down.
Okay.
Eventually,
President Assad wouldn't stand down. So your analogy is that force must be used against him from outside.
No, I asked, when would you ask him to stand down?
Whom?
When would you support efforts to
I don't think Russian policy is about asking people to step down. Regime change is not our profession. Some other countries are
not
engaged
even if
in
it brings
this.
an end to violence.
The end of violence could be achieved if everyone tells the people whom they control, the opposition groups on the territory of those countries, if they want the end of violence, they must tell them, you all guys, all of you, must drop the slogan which reads no dialogue, must drop the slogan of preconditions, and must sit down and deal with your own people, with your own country being at stake.
Mr. Lavrov, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.